let's talk about question number 4. Explain the law of dominance using monohybrid cross. So we have to explain law of dominance with the help of a monohybrid cross over here. First of all, we are talking about what is law of dominance. So law of dominance states that a dominant allele of a character, in a monohybrid cross expresses itself and suppresses the expression of another recessive allele. This is law of dominance. Law of dominance states that a dominant allele expresses itself in a monohybrid cross, whereas it suppresses the expression of another allele, that is recessive allele. For example, if we talk about a monohybrid cross by Mendel sir, he crossed the pure tall-heighted plant with pure dwarf plant. In the F1 generation, what he found that the recessive one doesn't expresses itself, the dominant express itself. In the F1 generation, all plants, all progeny were tall. There were no progeny, there were no individual with dwarf height. Whereas this dwarf-heighted plants or small plants expresses itself in the next generation. So this is what happens in the law of dominance. This states that the dominant allele expresses itself in a monohybrid cross where it suppresses the expression of recessive allele. This recessive allele is not lost, it remains. It remains there. It remains hidden or masked in the progenies of F1 generation, and it reappears in the next generation. This is what happens in the law of dominance, that in F1 generation, the dominant allele will express its expression in the progeny, in the phenotype, and the recessive allele is not lost, it remains masked or it remains hidden in the progeny of F1 generation, but it reappears in the next generation, that means in the F2 generation. When Mendel crossed the heterozygous plants between themselves, when the selfing was done in between the heterozygous tall plants, we found that in the F2 generation, some plants were tall, some plants were heterozygous tall, some plants were homozygous tall, and the recessive pair of allele reappeared, which was similar to the one of its parent. So this recessive allele expresses itself in the next generation. It expresses itself in the F2 generation. So this is the law of dominance with the help of a monohybrid cross, and here we are going to write the answer for, we are going to write the law of dominance, and we will also make a monohybrid cross to explain the law of dominance. So first of all, law of dominance states, that the dominant allele express itself in a monohybrid cross, and suppresses the expression of a recessive allele, It expresses itself, the expression we are getting in a monohybrid cross is of dominant allele, of course, and the recessive allele does not mean that it is lost, it is remain there, it is remain hidden there, it is remain masked there in the progeny of a F1 generation. So this is law of dominance, and this recessive allele, is not lost. It is not lost. However, we are not able to find this recessive allele in the F1 generation or in the progeny of F1 generation, but it will reappear in the next generation. It will reappear in the F2 generation. So, law of dominance states that a dominant allele expresses itself in a monohybrid cross and it suppresses the expression of a recessive allele. However, this recessive allele is not lost. It is remain masked or hidden. It is hidden or masked in the progenies of F1 generation, Alright, now we are going to make a monohybrid cross to explain this law of dominance. We know that law of dominance is actually where or when the dominant allele expresses itself and suppresses the expression of recessive allele. This recessive allele is going to express in the next generation or F2 generation. So let's talk about that. We know that Mendel crossed homozygous tall-heighted plant with dwarf homozygous plant. This is homozygous tall, pure tall plant, and this is pure dwarf plant with homozygous condition as small t. So now I am writing here it as dwarf because this is representing dwarf plant and this is representing tall plant. What he did, he actually crossed these two plants. He crossed these two plants, and in the F1 generation, what he found? In the F1 generation or in the first progeny, what he found that all plants were tall. All plants were tall but are heterozygous tall. He found that in F1 generation, the phenotype or the appearance of all the plants were tall, but genotypically they all are heterozygous tall. They are not similar to their parents. See, these progeny or these individuals in the F1 generation are not similar to one of these parents. These are not similar to this parent and these are not similar to this parent as well. Alright, so in the F1 generation, what he observed? He observed that on crossing this pure tall-heighted plant with this pure dwarf plant, he got all the progeny as tall plant but in heterozygous condition. Then where is this recessive allele? Where is this recessive allele? If it is not expressed in the F1 generation, it may be lost, but this is not true. It is not lost. It remains hidden in the progeny of this one generation 1. Here you can see this recessive allele, it is containing the recessive allele, it is also containing the recessive allele. All the plants are containing the recessive allele, but it cannot express itself because it is present with dominant one. And this is the rule that recessive allele cannot express itself in the presence of a dominant allele. It is only capable of expressing its expression in the presence of similar allele. That means a recessive allele. If the recessive allele is present with recessive allele, another recessive allele, then only the expression will come out. So what he done? He took one plant and he self-fertilized it. Alright. So what he done? Self-fertilized it. The plants of F1 generation self-fertilized with each other. So what he observed in F2 generation, he observed, first of all, these are going to make gametes, and the gametes we will get like this. The gametes we are going to make Punnett square over here. This is Punnett square. And what he observed in F2 generation, when he self-fertilized these plants, he self-fertilized the plants of F1 generation, then he found that a tall plant, pure homozygous tall plant, heterozygous tall plant, again a heterozygous tall plant, and a dwarf plant expressed in the F2 generation. That means the recessive allele is not lost, the recessive allele was not lost, they were remain hidden in the progeny of F1 generation and expressed, reappeared in the F2 generation, in the progeny of F2 generation. Here you can see when he self-fertilized the progeny of F1 generation. He observed that the maximum plants were tall, some of them were heterozygous or tall, some of them were homozygous tall, and some of them are dwarf, which are exactly similar to one of its parent generation. Alright, this is actually similar to one of its parent, which has reappeared in the F2 generation, which was not seen in the F1 generation. So this is the law of dominance with the help of a monohybrid cross. You have to remember that in the law of dominance, the recessive allele, which is not able to express itself in the F1 generation, is not lost at all. It remains hidden, it remains mapped or masked in the progeny of F1 generation, but it will reappear, it will express itself in the next generation, that is F2 generation. So this is the complete solution of question number 4.